Birds are giving us a beautiful sermon this morning. So I'd like to make some time to receive questions this morning. And there's only two kinds of bad questions. One is the question not asked, and the other is a question that's not a question. I can help you with the second one. If you have some, like something you're kind of chewing on, but you don't know how to make it into a question, then you just say whatever you're chewing on and you say, what about that? Or just put a question mark at the end. It's a little upswing at the last of the sentence, you say the Buddha. The Buddha? That's a question. So anyway, I don't want you to be too, you don't have to be too worried if you're chewing on something and you can't quite find the question of it. It's fine to bring it up and we can work something out. The other one I can't help you with. You have to just kind of be ready to ask a question. And sometimes that can be hard, especially in a public setting. But I assure you that your question is not only important to you, it's important to the assembly. And if you're having a question about something or chewing on something, everyone will eventually, if not in this lifetime, in some lifetime, be chewing on the same thing. And so it's very helpful to have that kind of generosity to put your question or what you're chewing on out in front of the assembly so that we can all benefit from it. So the way that works is you just say, it's kind of raise your hand in Gasho, and then you can ask questions. Mm-hmm.
I remember you talking many times how you were so on fire with the Dharma when you first encountered it as a young man.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the wholehearted way?
Yeah. For me, I'm a fire type. I'm an excited type. I like to throw myself in completely. From a young age. When I was a little boy in the sandbox, I'm going to fill it with water and I'm going to roll in the mud because that's the only way I could really know the sandbox. I mean, that's how I wanted to know the sandbox. Same thing with food. If I was going to eat, it's just like all over. And that is not the best way to be. It's not the worst way to be. It's a way to be. So for me, wholeheartedness has usually meant to kind of jump in the pool, not knowing whether I can swim or not. And then learning to swim in that new situation, finding out what water is, etc. And this is a wonderful way to practice, actually. I encourage everyone to try that. I'm not a person who has a lot of fear, so that kind of works for me. I sort of jump in. It also causes a lot of problems and breaks things and can make life hard sometimes. The reason I'm saying all that is because it's important for you to become intimate with your way. And everyone's way is different. Everyone's heart has a different constitution or a different quality. If you're the kind of person who likes to slip into the shallow end and walk back and forth and learn what water is in a quiet way, and then find your way into the deep end and then savor that place where your toes leave the bottom, then that is also wholehearted. The wholeheartedness is really about wholeness. It's how do we include all of the various feelings and thoughts and inspirations and fears that we have as we're stepping forward. And that's real bravery, not just to ignore the danger signs and jump in. Although for some of us, that's kind of how we do it. But to have that full inclusiveness is the real deep bravery. So, there's no trick to it. It just means don't long for escape. And when you do long for escape, then be tender with yourself, just like a crying baby. Hold yourself and know that things that are difficult are difficult.
Joe?
Hi.
This goes back to your talk a couple of weeks ago when you were talking about really wholeheartedly taking more responsibility for our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And my question in regards to that is, how can we discern when that responsibility is meant to manifest as being more active in going out and seeking and achieving things,
Mm-hmm.
and when it's meant to manifest as stepping back and being patient and trusting that the path or what we need will reveal itself to us in due time?
Yeah. So the movement forward or outward and the movement inward, the discipline there is not to separate the two. And many things will give us the signal that we should separate. Like we think it's time and we move forward on something and we like to make something happen, and then we reach a kind of like roadblock. And so we say, oh, now it's time to turn inward. That may be true, but the poison in it is we think that the moving inward is somehow separate from the moving toward or forward. And so in the spiritual work of that is not to pull back from the blockade, from the thing that's difficult, but to stay present there at the same time that we move inward. And that's called patience, right? But patience isn't like a separation from. Patience is our engagement is still present. The same thing is true the other direction. As we go in more into our internal life, when we become more familiar with the depths of our own consciousness, then you will reach floors. They're like a place where you just are, and that's your world now, and you need to explore it. And exploring it usually means manifesting your new insights into the world. So you move outward, but that's not because you need to leave that new terrain. It's because that new terrain you've discovered is your new reality. So you move outward, but you keep the connection inward. So this kind of quality is really important. Then when we reach the really difficult things in life, we have a reservoir to pull on to be able to stay present with, and then to drink deeply of what the world has to teach us.
Hey Joe,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell me a little more about the Great Compassionate Heart Dharma?
Oh yes, yes, yeah. I would say first of all, I encourage you all to believe in magic. And I don't mean that in just a kind of like silly way. I'm really dead serious about it. That there are movements in this world that are so far beyond our conceptual mind. And we have been given the gift of practice in many, many different ways, some of which we can kind of understand, or we can at least have a story about that makes sense. And some of them, they're just like very direct gifts from a world that we can't hold with our mind. And the Daihishin Dharani, or Great Compassionate Heart Dharani, is one of these kinds of things. So a Dharani, in its historical development, great bodhisattva or a Buddha may give an incantation to some students to help them along the path. And if you understood Sanskrit or the origins of that, oftentimes they had a lot of kind of devices inside of them that were poetic, etc., that would help you remember something. Right? And that helping to remember something was like being pressed with a seal, like like a stamp. Like in old cultures, those were very, very important to have some kind of a seal. Maybe it was on a ring that got pressed into something, wax. In China, it was always cinnabar that was put on those seals and then pressed into important documents, etc. So those Dharanis were like seals that were pressed into you. You didn't quite understand what they mean, but they would help you memorize something. Because most of us don't understand the origins of the language that they came from, or really, basically nobody does. We don't get that bonus. They're not easy for us to memorize, right? They don't rhyme exactly. Although if you listen to them, you start picking up patterns. Namu kara tanno toraya ya namu oriya burukiji shihuraya fujisato boya mokosato boya. If it starts to feel beautiful, and there's a rhythm to it, and there is something just like a song. But the reason that we recite those dharanis is the same. It presses something into us and draws something out of us that is beyond our mind's capacity to hold in a fixed way. So this song is an ancient song about compassion and about what is the quality of a heart or the nature of our heart that makes compassion fundamental to our being. And it draws that out of us and supports us in finding that more completely. This dharani is associated with Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and shows up in the sutras that come, from her teaching or his teaching. There are some translations, and you can read the translation, but if you just went online and said translation of the Great Compassionate Heart Dharani, something will come up and you can read it, but it's mostly incomprehensible. It's a story about the god Indra swallowing the whole sea for the purposes of saving beings. And it's a beautiful, beautiful kind of song. Hi.
In the Heart Sutra, we chant emptiness is form is emptiness. There's a whole number of other negations that are kind of like the core of our practice.
Yeah.
And Dogen Zenji throws kind of a wrinkle in this. He says the emptiness is emptiness and form is form. And I'm kind of used to contradictions at this point, but I'm wondering if you could give some thoughts on it.
Yeah. So this is probably the most famous teaching in Mahayana Buddhism. If you're in a Mahayana Buddhist country, like Japan, for example, you go into people's houses and they might have a scroll that says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. That's super cool. And it's 4 characters in Chinese, 4 characters, and then 4 characters in Chinese. And so this is something that, people hear all the time. Most people don't have an idea really how to think about that. But the reason I bring that up is because this is core Mahayana teaching. Right? This is, if we talk about Mahayana teaching, the Great Vehicle teaching is the earliest writings are Prajnaparamita writings or Perfection of Wisdom teachings. And the Heart Sutra is the heart of those teachings. And that phrase is like kind of the representative phrase of what those teachings are. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form. This is trying to teach us about the nature of living. So we have a tendency to think that form is permanent, that there's something intrinsic to the forms that we meet. So if we think about, we meet each other, and it's very easy for me to have this idea in my mind, like there is a Robert, there is some essential Robert. Like you are a thing that has its own separate identity. And so the teaching is telling us, no, anything we can see, any form, any experience, any phenomena, any being is not an independently existing entity that is just itself. It is empty. And what empty here means, in the traditional sense, is empty of self-nature. It means we're not of the nature of having a kind of permanent identity. What we are is we are a conduit for the whole of existence. Our soul is like a passageway in which the whole universe comes through and we appear. Right? That's what emptiness is teaching us about. So when I meet you, I meet the whole universe that is coming through a conduit, through a aperture, and I call that aperture Robert. So it's not that we should try to negate form to get to emptiness. We shouldn't say, no, form is wrong. Let's get rid of it so that we can go to emptiness. It's saying that's the nature of form. The nature of form is to be emptiness. And the nature of emptiness is to be form. There isn't some like separate place in which everything's gone and that's emptiness. It's right here. All of these things are instances of emptiness. They're instances of the universe springing into existence as this phenomena, this phenomena, this phenomena, this phenomena. Right? So that's a kind of core teaching. That's pretty good, right? But what Dogen says is too much. To even say form is emptiness, you're already using both words. You can't really use both words. If you say form, you just have to say form. There's nothing extra. There's no other thing to bring in. Form just is form. And that's what emptiness is form just being form. And emptiness is just emptiness. It's just emptiness. But emptiness just being emptiness is form. Right? So Dogen's trying to get us to be more, most teachings are like this. They're like a funnel. They can teach us the truth on one level, and then if we pay really close attention to it, it will narrow down. And it'll narrow down, and it'll narrow down, and it'll narrow down. And when we're lucky and diligent, both lucky and diligent, then our mind will turn and open. And when it opens, the contradiction is no longer a contradiction. It's the description of the way, or whatever the contradiction is, what appears as a contradiction is just a statement about how things are. And so it's good to pay attention to those levels as they come down. You know, maybe the level after form is form and emptiness is just yeah. And then maybe from there, there's another and another and another. Actually, there should be layer after layer. And do they go down? Do they go up? Yes. Yes, they go down, they go up. They go to the side, they come in, they go out. And that constant refraction is the mirror of life. And, is quite an invitation, really. Yeah. By the way, before you ask your question, I say hi, not because I'm trying to be really Japanese. It's like that is a thing. When people say your name in Japanese, you say hi. That's it. And in this environment, that's why I say that. I could just say yes, but I'm kind of conditioned to say hi. So that's what it means. Sorry. Hi. Oh, I'm sorry. Any guidance on when one is trying too hard? Yeah. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So effort is a very interesting spiritual question. And there is trying incorrectly. And that's sometimes what we call too hard. What I mean by that is when our effort is directed towards achievement, no matter how little or how great the effort is, in a way is too much. That our effort, we make a great effort towards non-effort. And that conundrum or that dynamic is where we learn about efforting. So if we take that into meditation, for example, that's a place that we study it. When we sit down for Zazen, there's one way where we might think, okay, I'm really going to clear my mind. And that's a good aspiration to have. Okay, I don't mean to, that's a good aspiration to have. But the question is, how? In what way will you make effort? And if your effort is to kill your thoughts, then it will always be too much effort. and you will become tighter and tighter. And in the increasing tightness, right, you will experience a kind of deep encounter with the blocked quality of your nature. Now, sometimes that's a really good teacher. Like you're just trying too hard. And then you can feel it and you can know. But the lesson there is not pull back your effort. The lesson is, with what do you do? How do you apply your effort? And so it's one of the most simple things in the world, which is what makes it hard, is we want to go past, the efforting, like towards an achievement, is to go past what's here, is to push ourselves to another place. And so this effort says, no, I have to receive. I have to pay attention to receiving. And that takes a different kind of effort. And you can't go past where you are. You have to actually accept where you are. And the effort becomes about that deep acceptance of where you are. And that takes a massive effort. It's just a different kind of effort than the pushing ourselves past where we are. Now, one of the things that quality that we take up in meditation, we say take the backward step. That's a very common instruction within our school, to take the backward step that turns the light and shines it backward. Lots of ways to understand that, but one way is to think about receptivity. Let me step back while I sit down for meditation. I step back and down, and let me accept and receive what's here. Stepping back, stepping back. What that gives us is the sensitivity to start realizing the ways which we're pushing forward, the trying too hard. And we can say, okay, what is that? And we can learn from it. And we can even work to accept that. We can even learn to feel that rather than make it an enemy. And then it can transform. Yeah. But it's very, I would say, if you're not experiencing your own over-efforting, you're over-efforting. You're skipping past, because you just are. That's what it means to be alive. This is what we do. It's kind of a nature of our consciousness. So it's really about making friendship with it than it is about eliminating it. Hey.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the concept of the word God and its relationship to emptiness and to the path.
Yeah, sure. It's a great interest of mine, actually. In what way could we use the word God? And when we think about other faiths that use the word God, what is the same? What is different? What hooks together? What doesn't hook together? And I would say my general advice is use God as it seems correct to you within the context. And then you find out more and more about the ways that it may work or not work. But don't be too afraid of it. Like, I used to really love to read Meister Eckhart's writings, who is a German mystic and great teacher. And so, for example, one of his most famous quotes and beautiful quotes is, the eye with which you see God is the eye with which God sees you. It's beautiful. I think that exactly maps on to our understanding of the Buddha eye. Right? And so that's a place where I'll oftentimes use that quote in a talk, or I'll offer that in some ways. Or I might riff off of it. I might say the Buddhist version of that quote is something like, the eye with which you see the bird is the eye with which the bird sees you. And in Buddhism, we don't need to have a God there. There's no final resting place. And so that's a place where I think there is some division, where in most religions that use God, particularly monotheistic religions, Abrahamic faiths, there is God has a primary place, typically, not always, but God has a primary place, and everything else is secondary or kind of inferior to God in some way. And in Buddhism, we really emphasize that all things are completely interrelated, the fact of that may be called God, but it means that nothing is primary and something else secondary. And so some of those conversations become interesting. I do think there's a way in which sometimes our relationship with with God, I'm just say relationship with God, is one in which becomes destructive. And what I mean by that is when God takes the primary place, there's a kind of weapon that can be employed to cut down everything else. And this, I think, is a primary issue with spiritual traditions that focus on God. It's something they struggle with. I hope it's best when they struggle with it, because then that's something they have to find the weakness in that, I believe. And in Buddhism, we have other kinds of weaknesses, but that's one, I think, in particularly monotheistic faiths that they need to work with, and we can remind them of that. Does that answer your question? Yes, good. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Jiju Zammai, this is Dogen Zenji, the founder of this particular school of Zen Buddhism in Japan. He said Jiju Zammai is the criteria. He said that is the criteria for the correctly transmitted Buddha Dharma. So what that means in kind of less technical language is, he says, that's how we can know authenticity. Jiju Zammai is authenticity of the lineage of the Tathagatas, of the spiritual teachings that have been passed down to us. Zammai is a transliteration, which means, like, sometimes when you take words from one language to another, you don't translate the word, you just say the word in a different way. Some popular examples are karate, which in Japanese is karate, so we transliterate it as karate, right? So there's lots of words which you're just saying them the way you can say them in your language. So zammai is the transliteration, a very old transliteration from Sanskrit into Chinese, and then Chinese translated into Japanese, of samadhi. And samadhi is sometimes translated as concentration. So when we say concentration, it's not just focusing the mind, it is a total state of being in which the truth of the Buddha's awakening is manifested in your body, speech, and mind. So that kind of concentration, or samadhi, is what he's referring to. And he's referring to a particular type, which is called Jiju Zammai, which is self-receiving and employing samadhi, which is like totally incomprehensible when you first hear it. Okay, self-receiving and employing samadhi. This goes back to a teaching about how Buddhas are. It said that Buddhas are both totally self-illuminating, and Buddhas are also totally other-illuminating. They have both qualities. And in most schools, they believe that that's the quality of a Buddha. A totally awakened being is like a gem which has its own light within it, and it just shines totally independently, without there being any outside. There's just the self of the Buddha. It's like the whole universe just as this gem, this illuminated gem. And then the Taju Zammai, or the other illuminating, is a Buddha illuminates and countless beings receive the illumination of that Buddha. Dogen Zenji's revolutionary thing is, he said, that's not just about Buddhas. That is your heart. Every being is that. Every being is a complete and total jewel unto themselves, a self which has no other. Your own soul, your own consciousness, your own moment-to-moment experience has the total illumination of all of the cosmos. And it illuminates itself without any differentiation. That's Jiju Zammai. and he said the Jiju Zammai is none other than the correctly transmitted immediate upright sitting, which he called zazen. So when we sit in meditation, whether we're a beginner or we've been sitting for a long time, whether we're in some kind of position within the lineage, or we are actually the follower of another path, but we've just come to sit zazen. It doesn't matter. Everybody's exactly equal in that regard. We all have that heart, which is that samadhi. It is that concentration. Our job is to learn to wake up to it, to care for it. And the quality of this school then revolves around that first acknowledgement. So when you first come to the temple, like, did someone say to you, okay, this is what you have to believe? No. Someone said, sit down. Let's sit together. Because I believe that you are a jewel, that you have this illumination, you have this radiance, which is core to your being. And it's really, really, really hard to wake up to it and care for it. And we need each other to be able to support each other in doing that. And so, in a way, it's the most, I guess, what do you call that when you're trying to convert people? Proselytizing, evangelize? Yeah, it's like, we know that everyone will wake up to it sooner or later. Maybe too arrogant. But that quality. So when we think about what is meditation, it leads us into a different place than I am going to meditate so that I can achieve this or achieve that or achieve this. Like we were talking about earlier about the effort. It means that we need, it's about a backward step into the fountainhead of our own being, because that's where we wake up to that illumination, or that quality. A fountain of incomparable light is what Prajnaparamita is called, and that's that illumination right there. So in a way, we hear those teachings and we think, okay, sounds really pretty, but my sitting kind of is hard or whatever. I would say, there's a real place for faith. And I don't mean the kind of faith where you just stubbornly believe. I mean the kind of faith where you say, I have an inkling that there's something about that. Even if I think like 3% of my being says, yeah, there's a luminosity at the core of my being. Maybe the other 97% says, no, it didn't. Then just turn on that 3% for a while. The 97% will be there. You can come back to it. But just exercise that 3% for a while and see what's there. It doesn't mean you have to convince yourself of anything.
What is chanting and why do we do it?
So, one of the core ways to understand what's happening with chanting is that we are reenacting the assemblies of the Buddha again and again and again. So the Buddha Shakyamuni, when the Buddha Shakyamuni was manifest as a human being on this plane, this planet, 2,500 years ago, Shakyamuni Buddha held assemblies with other beings like us that are fleshy, and we're all here. At least part of us is here. And so after the Buddha's passing into parinirvana, which means losing that physical form, we say that the Buddha's Dharma lives on in the world. One of the ways that it lives on in the world is that the followers of the Buddha continue to hold those assemblies. And if we were in an assembly where the Buddha was embodied in this world, then the Buddha would tell us those sutras. The Buddha would speak those sutras and we would listen. But because the Buddha is not embodied in that same way, but is embodied through the sutras, then we recite the sutras so that the presence of the Buddha is here. And on a more woo-woo level, the Buddha is here. There is a facet to our existence which is not visible in the conventional way. Our conventional eyes can't see. And so we honor that Buddha that is present by intoning those teachings. We make offerings. So this is much like if you read a sutra, what we do on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, looks a lot like what happens in a sutra. A representative of the assembly comes forward, that's me or another teacher at Buddha, will come forward, offer incense, bow, and then kneel. And in the sutra, usually what happens is a question will be asked. The representative of the assembly will ask a question, and the Buddha will give the teaching. But sometimes there's no question, there's just the teaching. So we're doing that. And then the teaching of the Buddha is recited. Sometimes that's a dharani, like the Great Compassionate Heart dharani, a teaching that's given in that kind of mystical incantation type of way. Sometimes it's a sutra, which is more like a teaching in words we can understand, like the Heart of Great Wisdom Sutra. And so that's a kind of core. Another thing about chanting is that a deep yogic practice. It teaches us about resonance and about breath. And so the way that we learn to feel our breath deep down in our belly is another quality of what chanting helps us to do. When the vibration is not just a vibration that's kind of like out there, but it's a vibration that is through our body, it helps us to harmonize and to align with many things, external and internal. So there's a deep exploration of that, and so that's why, when we chant, we oftentimes, is Namu Gara Tanno Doraya Ya Namu Riya. Oh, there's a vibrational quality to it, and that is so that the sutra goes down in and it goes out at the same time. It's kind of quality of the vibration, and it's fun. I would say that's the other reason. Sometimes it can be frustrating, especially if you're not able to harmonize with the group or something like that. But my teacher he said to me when I was training with him, he said, "You just chant as loud as you can. Just chant as loud as you can." And then I went to the monastery and they were like, "Whoa, you chant really loud." Well, actually, in Japan, it's more common that people won't say things directly like that. They will say, "Oh, you have such a beautiful chanting voice. We can hear it throughout the whole hall." And of course I thought, I do have a beautiful chanting voice. So I just kept going. It took me a while to find out. Maybe I was pushing a little too hard. But it's a great sangha practice to share our voices with each other. And so that's why I'm always encouraging people, you can't harmonize unless you get your voice out there. You can't harmonize in the abstract with anything, right? It's not an abstract activity. Harmonizing or becoming congruent with, it's not something you think through. I mean, you could think it through, like you could come up with strategies, but then you have to do it. Yeah, if you have to play basketball, right? Knowing all the rules and having explanation of how to do a layup or whatever will never get you to do a layup. You have to actually do it. So with chanting, I'm always encouraging people, just jump in. And even if your voice is a little bit small, it's fine. But once you start getting your own vibration out there, you'll start learning about what the vibration is. When you just take it passively, that's okay. But once you're hearing like, oh, and then you feel like, oh, and then pretty soon your body's going, oh, and then and then these sutras move through you. And that's one of the deepest ways that we receive them, is to allow them to move through, even when we don't understand the words. There's a lot there. So anyway, those are a few reasons. Yeah.
Buddhism is a non-theistic spiritual tradition, but there's gods in it. How does that happen?
Well, I don't think it's true that it's a non-theistic religious tradition. I believe that it's not a monotheistic religious tradition. And if we say it's not theistic, I think the way we could say it's not theistic is to say that there are gods, but the gods are not the most important thing. And that gods also have to be awakened. They also have to practice. They also have to, it's just one of the realms. In the traditional explanation, there are 6 realms of the transmigratory worlds. So those 6 realms, one of them is the heavenly realm. One realm is the human realm. One is the angry gods or the titans. One is animals. One is hungry ghosts, and one is the hell realm. So in that traditional explanation, the heavenly realms they're part of the cycle of birth and death, and we transmigrate through those different realms. So in a way, the heavenly realm, or the realm of the gods, is not seen as the most beneficial. The problem is that you have too much power and ease, and so you can't wake up to the roots of cyclical existence. It's like too good of a party, right? And so the human realm is seen to be really prized because stuff is good here, but it also sucks. And so we get both. And because we get both, we're able to wake up to something that we can't in that heavenly realm. So, I think for us in modern times, especially for those of us who are reacting to the problems of theistic faith, that a non-theistic or an atheistic approach is very appealing, and I think it has some real. I think it's important. It has something really important to bring to society, to get over human consciousness, to get over the kind of addiction to gods as being the ones that get to control everything. Because Buddhism is actually very revolutionary there, because it says, yeah, God's great. Are you awake? You have all this power. Are you awake? Are you enlightened? I once translated for a very important teacher who was here from Japan. It was quite a few years ago, and someone asked him this question about God, and he said, "Well, my question is not so much is there a God or is there not a God. My question is, what is God's practice?" And he was being a little flippant, but I appreciated that flippancy. That no matter who the being is, we should be concerned about the awakened heart. And that awakened heart is not larger in a god or smaller in an ant. That awakened heart is exactly the same in every being. And that's what Shakyamuni Buddha woke up to, and that's what Shakyamuni Buddha preached. And that's why Shakyamuni Buddha said, I am not a god. Don't worship me as a god, because you have that heart of awakening just like I do. And I want you to wake up to it. And in that awakening, you will know that there is no need to make a struggle between the ant and God. The ant doesn't need to be small and God be big. There's no reason for that kind of separation, because it only creates strife. That actually there's a way to walk in which we appreciate all things in their place as being important and whole. And that's the way in which I think that God becomes a tricky thing. Mm-hmm.
Is Avalokitesvara an individual thing, or does it exist in all of us?
Both. Avalokitesvara is a personification of compassion, and that personification is not a painting. That personification is a living force, and that living force appears to some people. Some people can see Avalokitesvara in their mind's eye with a total clarity, and Avalokitesvara talks to them and teaches them. And that being that appears in a person's mind's eye or their heart eye, or we could say not the fleshy eye, but the spiritual eye, is just as real as a being that we meet with our fleshy eye. The Buddha said there's 5 eyes. There's the fleshy eye, there's the divine eye, there's the prajna eye, there's the dharma eye, and there's the Buddha eye. The first 2 eyes deal with the way that they talk about how it is that we perceive phenomena. And a lot of the phenomena that we perceive come through the fleshy eye. And the eye here is just used as one of the organs of sense organs, okay? So what we see with the fleshy eye, or hear with the fleshy ear, or taste with the fleshy tongue, is all the things of our normal world. Like, there needs to be this materiality of this cup for me to be able to experience it, to see it with the fleshy eye. Right? And that's the realm of materiality. The divine eye sees into another realm. And that realm is one in which materiality is not the basis of seeing. So Avalokitesvara also appears in that realm, in the realm of the divine eye. And those people whose divine eye is open in a way can see those beings. And so we've received so many teaching because there's people who have been able to learn to see with that divine eye. Many of our sutras come because people are able to see that way. But those two, everybody has them. And the question, like I said before, about is God awake or not? The question is not like, do you have those? The question is, how do you use them? And the only way you can use them skillfully and to see through an awakened eye is to develop the prajna eye, which is the eye of wisdom, and the Dharma eye, and then eventually the Buddha eye. And those eyes are all eyes of awakening, whereas the first two eyes are not necessarily eyes of awakening. Some people see with the divine eye and they have a very twisted heart, and they create lots of problems. So that's a kind of classical understanding anyway. Hi.
Every morning we chant about great ancestors and great teachers.
Mhm.
So are people periodically added to this list? And if so, how's that decision made?
So there are different lists that get read. And so one of the lists, the longest list, is the lineage. And the lineage names get added to it as there are new heirs of the lineage. So, for example, we chant right now, we chant up into my teacher's name when we chant the lineage. And that's a tradition. My teacher is the founder of this temple. That's even though he's only been here once, he's the founder. And so the tradition is that you would chant the lineage to the teacher of the founder. My teacher's still alive, and so we don't chant his name. Once he passes away or passes into final nirvana, then there will be a whole separate chant, and we'll read his name as the first abbot of this temple. Someday, hopefully a long time from now, I'll die, and then my name will be added because I'm the second abbot. And then whoever the third abbot is, fourth abbot, fifth abbot, etc., that will be added in that way. So that's the most tightly controlled way that names get added, and that has to do with lineage, the lineage of the ancestors and the lineage of abbotship in a particular temple. When it comes to other names, like the most available or most changing way that we do it is people put names of people who have passed away or people who are in some difficulty, and we chant their names in to the lineage there. So that's the one that's the most, the way that gets decided is you just put their name on the list.
So like the great teacher, like when we chant the female names of the teachers.
Yeah, so that is a group of names of women ancestors. And in the modern era, particularly in the West, there's a recognition that the patriarchal nature of all of the cultures that Buddhism has come through has resulted in a list of names in which they either all are male, or we assume they're all male, or we can't differentiate who's male or not male because of the assumption that everyone would be male, and that there needs to be an honoring of women ancestors. So there was a lot of work that was done, particularly in the early 2000s by several Soto Zen teachers and a committee in the Soto Zen Buddhist Association that created that list of women ancestors. And so we also chant that with the intention to bring some balance to that imbalance that has been part of our tradition. There are other names that may get read in different places. I don't think we have any right now, but that's just my own laziness. So for example, it's been my intention for many years since the great teacher in Oregon and founder of Dharma Zen Center, co-founder Kyogen Carlson Roshi passed away, that we would read his name into the chanting every morning. So, but I haven't got around to. I think it's been 7 years or something since he passed away. But that's the other way that that things may get in, is people who are important to a temple. At my teacher's temple, for example, his father was also a priest, but he was a previous abbot, but he wasn't my teacher's teacher. So his name gets read every day into the chants because he was the important person. And my teacher's nephew, who died at a young age, is read into the chants. So some things like that. Hi.
What are some ways to encourage finding hope?
Hope, I think oftentimes to us, it feels something like a star. It's way up here. And what I find is to see the star, to be able to really see the star more clearly, I have to first pay attention to what is here on the ground. And I mean that in a very literal sense too, like a refuge in the natural world, to spend time in it, to let it speak to us, be receptive to it. And there's a way in which that grounding then leads to a kind of looking up. But oftentimes when we try to reach up and we haven't gone down yet, it's just frustrating. It's like we can't get any ladder tall enough. We can't clear out enough power lines or anything to get to that thing that we want to be able to see clearly. So, I'd encourage you, do you like natural environment? Yeah. So I'd encourage you, find ways, and it doesn't have to be fancy or far away. Now we have this big boom of kayaking and hiking and all this stuff, which is great. Except I wish there weren't as many people in all my favorite spots. But there's also just like, this fig tree here in the garden, and there's a beautiful path by the river, and there's all these lovely birds and squirrels and stars and moon and the smell of the earth. This season, one thing, I'm a very olfactory oriented person. The way things smell is important to me. And if you pay attention now, the air's changing, isn't it? There's smoke in it, but something deeper than that. Like you can smell the dryness and the leaves, and everyone says they love it. Like when it's fall, it's fall, you feel it's fall, and there's something, for some people it's going into winter and they're like, oh no, it's going to be winter, and it feels like a little bit like doom. But pay attention to that smell, because that smell itself has this kind of grounding effect in it. So I just really encourage you to, that's not about indulgence, it's about grounding. And then your own aspiration and inspiration can find its view up into a higher place. Yeah. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dudhyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dudhyampi Dhammam saranam Dadyambi Sang